Where do we start? The first 7 things to build in a student-driven classroom. When I first began studying schools like Acton Academy, Alpha School, and Khan Lab School, I assumed their success came from the technology or curriculum. But after visiting school after school, and now helping run Zero School here in Indonesia, I realized something very different. The best schools all had dozens of invisible systems. They had routines for discussions. They had systems for student motivation. They had clear expectations, town halls, student goal trackers, one-on-one coaching, even intentional ways of teaching students how to eat with a fork and knife. So the question is, if you're starting from scratch, which ones do you build first? Today, I'm going to share the 7 systems that I would put in place during the first 2 weeks of school. Get these right, and you'll build a classroom where students increasingly know exactly what to do autonomously to be successful. Welcome to Guide School, where we explore what school can become in the age of AI. I'm Heather Clayton-Staker, and every show I share what I'm learning as we build guide model schools around the world. What's working, what's failing, and what the future of teaching, learning, and childhood can look like. Let's jump in. Where do you start? The first 7 things to build in a student-driven classroom. The not-so-surprising question I hear most often from schools that want to pilot test an AI-powered instructional model with guides instead of teachers is simply, but where do we start? There is so much to build. Maybe you visited a school like Acton Academy, Alpha School, Khan Lab School, Summit Public Schools, Greater Dayton School of Ohio, Apogee, or Prenda. Maybe you're leading a traditional classroom and wondering how you could begin giving students more ownership over their learning and free their time for afternoon projects and talent development. Maybe you're planning to open a micro school, or maybe you're just simply curious about what happens when we redesign school around student agency and guide support instead of whole group instruction and whole group teaching. Whatever brought you here, the question is the same. Where do you begin? When I first started studying guide model schools, it wasn't as a guide. I was a parent. My own children enrolled in the very first Acton Academy in Austin, Texas, back when there were only 7 children in what is now a global network. And I was fascinated to see students of various ages working together to build their academics and then build cool projects without any conventional instruction in sight. Later, still as a researcher and as a parent, I visited many other schools that were experimenting with similar ideas. I observed Alpha School, Farmington High School, Khan Lab School, public schools using personalized learning, and now I've had the opportunity to help run Zero School here in Indonesia. What struck me was that every one of these schools had developed dozens of thoughtful systems. Some had beautiful discussion routines. Others had apprenticeship programs. Some had carefully designed motivation systems. Others had traditions that help students form friendships, coaching systems that strengthen relationships, or surprisingly intentional ways of teaching life skills. One of my favorite examples came from Alpha School in Brownsville. The guides noticed that many students didn't know how to cut, so they intentionally began serving lunches with big pieces of chicken or steak so that students could practice that skill. A simple lunch became an opportunity to learn a life skill. I loved seeing examples like that, but they also created a problem. If you're starting your own student-driven classroom, you can't build 50 systems before students arrive. You have to decide what comes first. If you're a micro school or a school district wanting to pilot this model, you can't reinvent your entire program all at once. You'll need to prioritize. I was visiting a school recently when I was back in the United States where the leader reflected on how rocky their first year had been. The guides weren't well trained, the academic software was not dependable, some students were able to get their work done, others were a major distraction to the rest of the class. But now, in their 3rd year, everything was feeling smoother. Listening to this leader, I found myself wondering how best to advise other school leaders on what to build first when you're starting from scratch. You can't have everything ready on day 1, so where should you focus your efforts? That's what I'd like to talk about today. Before I begin, I want to make one assumption. This episode assumes you've already built your academic core engine. In other episodes, we've talked about choosing adaptive learning apps, building an AI-powered tech stack, and designing personalized academic pathways. We'll continue talking about those pieces because they're incredibly important. But today isn't about the technology. Today is about the human systems. Once students open their laptops, what human systems make everything else work? If I were starting over tomorrow, whether I were opening a micro school, piloting one classroom inside an existing traditional school, or launching a student-driven program for the first time, these are the 7 things I would build during the first 2 weeks. Everything else can come later. Before sharing these 7 systems, we'll hear a few words about 3 guide school programs. The first is our self-paced From Teacher to Guide course, developed in partnership with Arizona State University and the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. In about 15 hours, you'll learn the core mental models, daily routines, and systems that guides use. If today's episode is sparking your curiosity, that's the best place for your school's innovation team to begin. You can learn more at guide.school/ASU for Arizona State University. For schools that are ready to use the AI-powered academic engine behind the guide model, we've created Core Engine. We help schools choose and procure high-quality learning apps, simplify student logins, generate personalized weekly goal trackers for each student, and use AI to recommend exactly what each student should learn next. Our goal is to make the core academic block turnkey to implement so your guides can spend more time doing the deeply human work I just talked about. This is a buyer's consortia for getting that tech stack put together. You can learn more at guide.school/engine. And if you're ready to master the craft of guiding alongside educators from around the world, take a look at our foundational guide certification in Nashville. It's a deluxe hybrid program that begins online with some self-paced work mixed with Zoom calls with me and culminates with a fabulous in-person retreat where we practice the art of guiding while enjoying delicious food and fun together. You can find that at guide.school/foundations. The first system I would set up during the first 2 weeks of class has nothing to do with academics. It's group formation. Whenever a new group of students comes together, there's uncertainty. Students wonder, do I fit in? They wonder whether they'll make friends, whether they'll succeed, whether they'll belong. And that feeling of belonging isn't really surprising to any of us. It sits underneath many of the behavior problems that we see during the first few weeks of school. Students who don't yet feel connected are more likely to withdraw, to test boundaries, or to disrupt the group. On the other hand, when students begin feeling that they're part of something, that they matter to the group, and that the group matters to them, they naturally begin rowing in the same direction. So before students can become self-directed learners, they need to become members of a community. You don't need an elaborate system to accomplish this. One of my favorite examples came from Acton Academy, where my children attended. During the first couple of weeks of school, the students created a lip dub together. The guides selected an upbeat song about belonging, and the students worked together to choreograph and film a continuous one-take music video. One student became the camera operator, others planned scenes in different rooms. Everyone contributed something. By the time they finished, they'd created more than a video. They'd created a huge number of inside jokes and an important shared memory. Here in Indonesia, we did something much simpler. Fortunately, I had packed a wiffle ball, a plastic bat, and a few lightweight bases in my suitcase. The children here love football, what we Americans call soccer, but very few had ever practiced baseball. So during those first few afternoons, we simply went outside together and learned wiffle ball. You can really choose any game or fun activity for the same effect, but the key is to get everyone involved and having fun together. Even after one morning of wiffle ball practice, students who had never spoken to each other were cheering each other on. So establishing belonging can begin with something as simple as learning a new game together. I also think every school benefits from creating some version of a student portfolio or a student profile. In more formal settings, a student profile might include assessment data, languages spoken at home, allergies, learning preferences, family background, and those can all be valuable. But an equally powerful student profile activity can be really wonderfully simple. We gathered old children's magazines that I brought from America, cut out hundreds of pictures, and invited students to create about me collages on large sheets of paper. They filled them with favorite animals, sports, hobbies, foods, dreams, and drawings. Then we displayed those about me boards on the front of their desks. That one exercise was enough to get us going. Students wandered around looking at one another's posters and discovering shared interests and then beginning conversations that otherwise might have never happened. As your school grows, you'll want to think about students who join later in the year. Group formation isn't only something that happens in August or September. Every new student needs an intentional pathway into the community. If students leave those first few days believing, I might kind of belong here, you've built a foundation that makes every other system easier. It sounds soft and squishy, I know, and you might think, really, that's her first move? I'm not listening to the rest of this because that's way too much of a soft, non-technical piece of advice. But that one belief is non-negotiable for starting a viable classroom, that belief, I belong here. So don't skip it. Okay, the next system, the second system I'd build, if I had 2 weeks to prioritize, I would build a student goal system. Student-driven learning only works if students always know what they're supposed to do next. At any given moment, a student should be able to answer 4 questions without asking the guide. What subject am I working on? Which learning app should I open? What is my goal today? And how will I know when I've finished? If those answers aren't immediately visible, students spend an enormous amount of energy simply figuring out what to do or calling for the guide's help. Heather, Heather, Heather. I hear a lot of that when my systems are not tight. That uncertainty slows learning and creates unnecessary dependence on the guide. It's very tiring. One interesting evolution I've watched over the years is how guides approach student goals. In many of my earlier schools I studied, students were encouraged to set their own SMART goals. So a specific, measurable, achievable goal. And so they might decide how many Khan Academy skills to complete, how many IXL questions to answer, or how many vocabulary words to learn during the week. There was a beautiful philosophy behind that approach, and students were taking ownership of their learning. More recently, I've noticed something different emerging, particularly through Alpha School's 2-hour learning program. Rather than asking students to decide their own daily workload, Alpha's platform uses data to recommend exactly how many XP students should earn each day in each subject. So their software considers pacing, prior performance, academic readiness, and generates personalized assignments automatically. So that's an interesting development. Students set SMART goals on the one hand, or top-down learning assignments on the other hand. If you go with top-down assignments, students still have tremendous agency at a school like Alpha School. They decide how to approach the work, how quickly to move, whether to exceed expectations, and how to solve difficult problems. But they no longer have to solve that original question, which is how much work should I assign myself today? I'm increasingly persuaded that computers may actually be better at answering that question than students are. So I'm starting to shift from, even when Michael Horn and I wrote the book Blended and we recommended SMART goals, I'm starting to shift more towards allowing the algorithm to suggest assignments to students because it can do it based on a lot of data that the students are not even aware of. So agency doesn't necessarily mean designing your own assignment every morning. Sometimes agency means choosing how you'll climb a mountain whose path has already been thoughtfully planned for you. When we came to Indonesia, 2-hour learning wasn't available here, so we had to build our own version. We licensed about 10 adaptive learning applications along with the NWEA MAP assessment as our benchmark. Then we created our own daily student goal trackers, inspired in part by research I conducted years ago for the Christensen Institute called How to Create Higher Performing, Happier Classrooms in 7 Moves. One classroom in that study that stayed with me belonged to a teacher named Miss Kelly. She generated and printed out customized weekly IXL skill grids for each Algebra 1 student in her class. Every student was able to refer to that grid and know exactly which skills to complete that week because the roadmap was sitting right in front of them. I loved being able to watch as the students checked off as they completed their work. That template inspired the way that we do core skills and student goal trackers here. Sometimes elegant systems are remarkably simple. Our version has grown from there, from what we saw with Ms. Kelly. Each student here receives a printed or digital goal tracker. Either version can work depending on what the student prefers and whether they're the internet's working on all sorts of things, that lists exactly what to accomplish each day across subjects. If a student struggles on a quiz and doesn't demonstrate mastery, the tracker automatically routes that student toward the prerequisite skills needed to fill those knowledge gaps before attempting the assessment again. So we use AI to fill those custom skills that the kid needs to learn in order to be at grade level without any holes in their learning. The guide reviews and adjusts those goal trackers each week based on conversations with the student, observations during learning time, assessment results, and our own recommendations about which applications best fit that learner's needs. It takes me maybe about 2 hours every Friday afternoon to adjust goal trackers and get them ready for the next week. Building this system took a tremendous amount of work. Selecting the learning apps from the whole array of edtech out there was only part of the challenge. We also had to determine what success should look like for each application. So how many skills or XP or units should the student complete to be able to get their check on that goal? How much work represented a healthy challenge and how students could see their progress throughout the day. That visibility for the student and for the guide, it turns out to be incredibly important. When students can literally watch themselves checking off meaningful accomplishments, they begin to experience something powerful. They're no longer wondering what to do next. They no longer have to ask the guide what to do next. They're simply playing the game well. And that's exactly what a good student goal system should do. It should remove uncertainty so students can devote their attention to learning. You can see our full student goal system called Core Engine at guide.school/engine. We're setting it up as like a consortia so that other people can benefit from this legwork instead of recreate the wheel. Okay, so number 3, the third system I would establish within the first 2 weeks of school is discussion rules. One of the biggest misconceptions about student-driven classrooms is that students naturally know how to have thoughtful discussions. They don't. Just because you remove the teacher from the front of the room doesn't mean students automatically know how to listen well, build on one another's ideas, or disagree respectfully. Those skills have to be taught just as deliberately as multiplication or writing or any of the other subjects. At Zero School, we eventually found ourselves using 3 distinct learning spaces. The first is our academic room, and that's where students spend their morning time working through their personalized learning pathways and student goal trackers that I just talked about. It's a room with desks, laptops, charging cables, headsets, and books. If I were designing one from scratch, and this is kind of just an aside, but I would arrange the desks in rows rather than clusters because there's actually a fair amount of research suggesting that rows reduce distraction during independent work. And that's exactly what we're trying to optimize during core skills. Our second space is what we've affectionately named the zebra room because it has a large zebra rug. And that's where we gather for our opening discussions, our community meetings, games, project time, anything that requires students to think together rather than working independently. And then the third space, of course, here is that beautiful outdoors. We are very fortunate in this respect, although where I live does lack a lot of basic things. I would not mind if there were a Target here. I would not mind if there were even just a grocery store here. But we do have ample outdoor space, so you can be jealous of me in that respect. That's where we spend our breaks, play wiffle ball, work in the garden and on the farm. If I'm being honest, we're only about 50 yards away from the most beautiful beaches I've ever seen in my life, so that's an advantage to my stint here. And we spend much of the afternoon on projects and exploration time outside. So those are our 3 main spaces. It's in that second room, the zebra room, that I have learned an unexpected lesson. At first, I thought having students sit on a rug in a big circle for our group discussions would work best. It seemed like the egalitarian thing to do, and I sat on the same level as them. But our students range from 1st through 9th grade here, and the younger students quickly discovered that, and sometimes the older students, that rugs are wonderful places for rolling around, wrestling, and distracting others. So I experimented with bringing in chairs and having students sit in chairs in a circle rather than on the floor. And I found that when everyone had their own space, they kept their hands to themselves more naturally and the conversations became calmer. So that was just in our circumstance. I'm not saying that that is a well-researched anecdote in other circumstances, but here we did find that furniture arrangement made a difference. But furniture arrangement alone isn't enough. You're also going to need discussion rules ASAP, posted right there on the wall next to the zebra rug. I don't like handing students a list of rules that I've written myself. It doesn't jive with this mentality of student-driven and community empowerment that we're really working for with students. It's interesting because in these guide models, in these new types of classrooms, we really find that even how we do classroom management is different because you don't want it to be antithetical to the ethic you're creating of student-driven. So every question does require a new system to think through how do we create a system where students are feeling empowered and learning to think entrepreneurial and create their own community and be ready to drive their own learning. So the same goes for creating your discussion norms. The discussions belong to students, and so the norms should largely come from them as well. I usually begin by asking a simple question. I say, have you ever been in a group discussion that was frustrating or boring? Every student has. Someone interrupts constantly, one person talks forever, nobody listens, side conversations break out, people criticize ideas without explaining why, someone pokes another person. I list all these things on the whiteboard. And then I ask a second question. What would make discussions more interesting of this list that we just created? Which one of these matter most? And the answers begin pouring out. Someone says maybe listen when someone else is speaking. Someone says build on someone else's ideas. Explain your thinking. Keep your comments concise. Invite quieter people into the conversation. Students almost always generate an excellent list on their own. Maybe I'll add a few suggestions if I think something important is missing, but then we discuss them together and students defend their favorites, and then students vote until they've narrowed the list down to a manageable number of discussion norms that everyone can realistically remember. And then we post them permanently in the zebra room. These norms become part of the culture. Whenever a discussion starts getting chaotic, I generally don't have to nag. I simply point to or call out one of the norms on the wall. Good discussions are one of the hidden superpowers of a student-driven classroom. Students learn to think before they speak. They learn to support opinions with reasons. They learn to change their minds when someone presents better evidence. I just love good group discussions. Sandwiching in the independent and collaborative work that students are doing really brings your community together. Students can become better listeners. Perhaps surprisingly, they also become better writers. This is a gospel according to Heather. So I would love to see good statistical analysis of this, but what I've observed is that it's easier to write thoughtfully after you've already wrestled verbally with an idea. So as students are discussing and debating, they become better critical thinkers and they have wrestled with the idea so that they are able to articulate it better to others. And in their written work, they actually have something to say. So that's a side note, but it is an important reason for group discussion also. If you skip this step of setting up discussion rules during the first couple of weeks, discussions often become stressful for students and for the guide. But if you invest in them early, they become one of the most enjoyable parts of the day, and they tee up students for the independent and collaborative work that follow. The fourth system I'd build is what we call class customs. These are different from discussion rules. Discussion rules govern just that one particular activity. Class customs govern the entire school. When we first opened Zero School, I made a mistake. I wanted the school to be democratic, so I assumed students should create all the rules themselves. It sounded empowering, but in practice, it wasn't honest. There were certain expectations that simply weren't negotiable. Students couldn't leave campus whenever they wanted. They couldn't damage school property. They couldn't lie, cheat, or steal. Those weren't topics that I genuinely wanted the community to debate. Eventually, I realized that pretending everything was up for discussion actually created confusion. So now we're much more transparent. There are a small number of class customs that the head of school and I established because they're necessary for safety and for parents to trust sending their children to the school. Everything else can be discussed during town hall or your group, your community meetings. Our customs include things like no lying, cheating, or stealing, no violence, respect school property, use laptops only for schoolwork, not for Roblox and stuff, remain on campus during school hours, uplift others. That's about it. So the list is quite short, and students should be able to remember that list pretty easily. It's in student-friendly language. Once you've established your customs, you'll also need a clear consequence system. At our school, breaking a class custom results in a yellow card. A yellow card means the student moves to the guide table, for the remainder of the work period, and they temporarily lose access to purchasing items from our school store, and they have to just work more closely with me. If a student breaks another class custom while already on a yellow card, that becomes a red card. A red card means they leave the classroom until they're ready to return. Before coming back, they write a short letter explaining what happened, apologizing, and expressing their commitment to rejoin the community successfully. I don't enjoy giving yellow cards, but I've learned that clear boundaries are actually kinder than inconsistent ones. One day, one of our students became frustrated and snapped his pencil in half. He just broke it in half right in front of me when he was just so mad. And this is when we were having a conversation together and he just wanted to act out. So he just broke his pencil. At first, I hesitated. Was that really a violation of our respect school property class custom? After all, it was only a pencil. But on the other hand, on our island, pencils aren't necessarily as easy to replace as they are in the United States. In fact, every pencil in our classroom has come over in my suitcase. I think I brought about 300 over in my suitcase when I first came here. But more importantly, the issue wasn't the pencil. It was whether our class customs meant what they said. So in a split-second decision, I decided to pull the student aside and I gave him a yellow card. He was upset. He's only 9 years old. He wanted and he needed, at that point, he asked if he could just sit outside. Or I just observed that he was upset, so I invited him to sit right outside the classroom for a while. And I stayed right out there with him and reassured him that we valued him and explained that as soon as he was ready to work at the guide table, we could go on in there together and get going. And so eventually he stood up and trudged in and sat down at the guide table, and he sat beside me and he finished his work. The boundary was held, and afterwards the entire class understood that our customs aren't arbitrary. They're real, and what I have found is that students don't resent consistent boundaries nearly as much as adults sometimes fear. Quite often, clear expectations make students feel safer. The fifth system I'd put in place within 2 weeks is a motivation system. Self-directed learning sounds wonderful, but let's be honest, it's hard. Every morning after group discussion, we're asking students to open a laptop and immediately begin working on material that's intentionally challenging. Good adaptive learning software constantly places children and the students just beyond what they can do independently. And that's exactly where learning happens. It's also where frustration happens. So during the first few days of school, that novelty carries students along, and they're doing pretty well, it seems, for those first few days. Everything's new, it's exciting, but eventually that wears off, and students need another reason to push through difficult work. And that's why this motivation system is included in my top systems to put in place in the first 2 weeks. At Zero School, we have several motivation systems, but one of the basics that I would recommend maybe considering first is something like ours. We use a simple classroom currency called $0, or ZDs for short. We got this idea from Acton Academy that uses alpha bucks. The school is named Zero School because of its commitment to environmental stewardship and the idea of zero waste. Not only zero waste of resources, but also zero waste of children's potential. The currency name $0 came from that idea. Students earn $50 whenever they complete their entire goal tracker, 100% for the day. They also earn ZDs for choosing what we call a Zen move when they need to reset. This incentive came in response to the needs of one student in particular who was struggling to regulate emotions and would sometimes have fairly dramatic outbursts. Rather than simply responding to the behavior, we decided to reward the opposite behavior. Students now earn an additional $0 if they choose to calm themselves appropriately using a Zen move we've practiced rather than having a tantrum. We also noticed that transitions were becoming sluggish. Students would linger after breaks while everyone waited. So we added one more $0 for punctuality. Now students can earn up to $7 $0 each day. What makes the system fun is that the currency actually matters. We have a small school store with snacks, inexpensive prizes, art supplies, toys, and a few larger rewards that require students to save for quite a while. One of the most popular items, amusingly enough, is beef jerky. I packed several bags in my suitcase from the United States because it's difficult, actually impossible from what I've seen, to find here in Indonesia. The students absolutely love it, and I honestly don't know what I will replace it with once we run out, but I will hopefully find something. The superpower of the $0 store is that it helps students remember every single day that sustained effort brings meaningful rewards. It sure helps me show up for work if I find like I'm getting paid for my work. They soon learn to connect the pain they feel with Math Academy or iExcel or Lexia or whatever the app is with real $0 that they get for pushing through that pain. I also like classroom currency because it's flexible. If there's a new behavior we'd like to encourage or a new skill set, like leadership, kindness, cleaning up after lunch, helping younger students, you don't need another lecture. You simply adjust the economy and you can vote on it in your town halls. Students quickly discover that the behaviors that strengthen the community are also the behaviors that help them succeed. And that's a lesson that will take a huge amount of work off of you as the guide if you set up your classrooms for success in that way right away. They will autonomously know what they need to do to be successful. The sixth system I'd like to call out for your first 2 weeks is a town hall. One of the first things you'll discover very quickly is that students have opinions about everything once you free them from a compliance-based conventional classroom culture. They have ideas for improving the school store, changing routines, adding rewards, adjusting the student goal expectations, and solving interpersonal conflicts. You want to encourage that and create a student-directed culture, but you'll soon find that the suggestions start piling up. It didn't take long for us to realize we needed somewhere to put those ideas. So we started a simple community agenda. Whenever a student has a suggestion, I don't stop what we're doing to discuss it. I simply smile and say, let's put that on the town hall agenda. Then I write it on the whiteboard and we move on. That tiny system started shaping our classroom culture in the right direction from the very start. Students felt heard because their ideas weren't dismissed. At the same time, they learned that not every decision needs to happen the moment someone thinks of it. There's an appropriate time set aside to improve the school together. During town hall, the students work through the agenda together. Students explain their proposals, other students ask questions, and eventually they vote. Sometimes the proposal passes, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes the group modifies it into something better than the original idea. One of the first debates we had involved our $0. Should students be allowed to save them from week to week? Could they trade them? Should the school store open only during lunch or at other times as well? These weren't life-changing decisions, but they mattered so much to the students because they really cared about these issues. And also they just felt like they were helping to shape their community. Another debate focused on what to do when a student is caught visiting a non-academic website during the morning academic time. The class eventually decided, and this was not my idea, but they decided to make a wheel of punishment in which the guilty student had to spin it to determine their consequence. The wheel they created had consequences like 15 push-ups, dunking your head in the pool 10 times, or running to the beach and back 5 times. If you refuse to do your punishment, then the rest of the class has to. So there's like some social stigma there to not just taking your licks. As the year goes on, town hall becomes much more than a meeting. It becomes one of the ways students practice citizenship. They learn to make proposals, defend their reasoning, listen to opposing viewpoints, compromise, and accept the outcome of a vote even when it doesn't go their way. If you're worried that democracy is failing, we need more schools like this, where we really practice those skills of listening to another person's opinion and finding a resolution. One important clarification, though, and that is that town hall is not where students decide their class customs. Safety, academic honesty, respect for property, and similar expectations are the guides or head of school's responsibilities. Those create the foundation that allows the community to function. Town hall or your community meeting is where students improve everything else. One unexpected benefit is that town hall gradually changes the guide's role. Instead of feeling like the school administrator who has to make every decision, you become the facilitator of a community that increasingly learns to solve its own problems. Every week, you'll probably notice students proposing ideas that never would have occurred to you. Some will fail, but others will become traditions that define your school. The seventh and final system I'd worry about in the first 2 weeks is one-on-one check-ins. When people first hear about schools with guides instead of teachers, they sometimes ask an understandable question. If students are learning through adaptive software instead of whole group instruction, what exactly is the guide doing? This is one of the answers. AI-powered apps handle much of the instruction. Guides support and nurture the learners. Those are not the same thing. A good one-on-one check-in isn't simply about academic progress. Of course, you'll review a student's goal tracker, celebrate accomplishments, identify the student's knowledge gaps, and adjust goals when necessary. But the real purpose is to understand the student sitting right there in front of you. Sometimes you'll discover that a student who appears unmotivated is actually just discouraged because they keep failing on one particular skill. Sometimes you'll realize that a student is racing through their work because they're so afraid of not getting 100% completion and losing their $0 for the day. Sometimes you'll learn something that has nothing to do with school at all. Last week, one of our younger students arrived with a terrible earache because a large, I think it was like a fly, some kind of an insect, incredibly enough, what are the odds this would happen? But it was in the evening and it flew right into his ear and lodged directly in his ear. And his mom couldn't get it out, and he ended up having to spend the evening at the local health clinic, for what it's worth here, trying to get the fly extracted. They were finally able to apparently get it out with some kind of a flush with like saline and tweezers. But he came to school the next day, and having our one-on-one and knowing that what he had gone through changed the way I saw this boy for the rest of the week, and helped me know that he needed quite a bit of compassion because he had just gone through all of that. Those conversations remind me that every person in our room is a real human with their own drama unfolding. The conversations don't need to be long. 5 or 10 minutes is often enough. What matters is that every student knows that there is an adult in the building who knows them, notices their progress, understands their struggles, and believes they can succeed. A side note, too, about those one-on-one check-ins is that I find that they're so instrumental in helping students love school, that when I take the time to meet with them and affirm them and tell them that I love them and I love the work they're doing and I admire this and that about them, and then ask them what their struggles are, they just blossom and they come to school with a really different attitude than when I'm not taking the time for those. And it is the reason for the guide model. One-on-one check-ins, it's such a luxury that we can give students today because we have technologies that can do the instructional piece. So stepping back, I've shared 7 systems to put into place in your first 2 weeks so you're off to a strong start. If I'm being completely honest, those 7 systems are only the beginning. When you shift from a traditional classroom to an AI-powered guide model school, you're really redesigning the entire operating system of the school. That doesn't require 7 new systems. It requires hundreds of new systems. I'm just being honest with you. You'll eventually create systems for projects, internships, or apprenticeships, exhibitions, or parent showcases, parent communication, student leadership, onboarding new students, celebrations, technology, lunch, field experiences, conflict resolution, and countless other parts of school life. That realization, I know, can feel overwhelming at first. It certainly did for me. But the encouraging news is that you don't need hundreds of systems on day one. I promise you, you don't. You only need enough structure for a healthy school culture to begin taking root, like that little seedling. Once students feel like they belong, they know what to work on, they understand how to discuss ideas, they respect the class customs, they have meaningful motivators and incentives, they participate in town hall, and they know they'll have regular one-on-one conversations with a guide, something remarkable begins to happen. The classroom starts organizing itself. One of my favorite observations from MIT professor Edgar Schein is that culture is simply the way we do things around here. That's what people say. It's just the way we do things around here. They won't even know it's culture. At first, you're the one intentionally designing those ways. But over time, the students stop feeling like they're part of a system. Actually, what you're designing stops feeling like systems at all and starts feeling like culture. Students begin reminding each other about discussion norms before you do. They settle disagreements by suggesting a town hall proposal. They open their goal trackers without being prompted. They choose a Zen move because that's simply how things are done around here. That's when you know the systems are working. The goal is to create a culture where students increasingly know what success looks like and autonomously choose the behaviors that lead to it. The guide spends less time managing and more time coaching because the community itself begins carrying much of the weight. If you're standing at the beginning of this journey, don't let the size of the vision discourage you. Every mature guide model school I've visited has accumulated hundreds of thoughtful systems over many years, but none of them started there. They started with a handful of foundational practices, improved them a little each week, and gradually built a culture that became stronger than the individual routine or the rule. That's where I would begin. Build these 7 systems first. Live with them for a while, refine them, then add the next system when your students are ready. A year from now, you'll have a school that looks very different than it does today because you laid a strong foundation and kept building. If these ideas resonate with you, I'd encourage your team to form a small innovation super team and work through our Arizona State University course called From Teacher to Guide, Leading AI-Powered Learning in Classrooms. We created it together with Arizona State University and the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation to help educators thoughtfully redesign school for this new era. It's a great starting point. You can enroll at guide.school/ASU for Arizona State University. It's actually hosted on their platform. And if you're ready to build the kind of AI-powered academic engine that we're using at Zero School with personalized student goal trackers, carefully curated learning apps, single sign-on, and AI-assisted recommendations for what each student should learn next, look at Core Engine shared service at guide.school/engine. Action and in-person fun, join me this fall in Nashville for our foundational guide retreat. Spots are limited. Go to guide.school/foundations to grab your seat. And thanks for listening. Subscribe to the Guide Schooling YouTube channel to never miss an episode. You can also get field notes from me by signing up for my emails at guide.school/contact. That small effort that everyone asks for, but it really sincerely helps you know if you've been in my seat trying to build something like this. It helps spread the word about how to improve teaching and learning for the almost 2 billion children who need a better school model. See you next time.